my name is Chip Pickering. I'm the CEO of INCOMPAS, and it's great to have everyone join us. We have a tremendous panel that I'd like each of them to introduce themselves and their firms, and then we'll kind of kick off our discussion. But it's been an eventful period in our national history, our political and our policy, and precedents and norms are being disrupted left and right. It's been a shock and awe in many parts of our government, and we're going to try to make as much sense out of it as possible today, especially as it affects and relates to our industry and the issues and the policies that we're all working on. And we'll have a great conversation today that I believe will shed light on where we are today, and as we look forward to the next 6 months, what are some of the likely outcomes? What are the trends and directions? And what is the broader meaning of this period of time where everything that every way that we used to do things is being reset, reformed, disrupted? And in that context, I'd like everybody, John, I'm going to start with you to introduce yourselves, and then we'll start this conversation.
Great. Thanks for having me, Chip. John Heitmann, I'm a partner here in town at Nelson Mullins. Glad to join you.
Patricia.
Hi, everyone. I'm Patricia Cave. I'm a senior associate at Morgan Lewis here in our DC office in the Telecommunications, Media, and Technology Practice Group.
Tamar.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me, Chip. I'm Tamar Finn. I'm a partner in Cooley's Communications Group here in DC.
Well, so our first question is, we have all, over our careers, been primarily focused, both from the 1996 Act to present, on FCC regulatory proceedings and the policies and the rules that the FCC sets. We're now in a situation where Congressman Starks announced that he is departing before the next meeting for the FCC. We have Olivia Trusty, who's pending confirmation in the Senate. Ariel Roth, her confirmation is pending to NTIA. We have BEAD, we have major policies that are waiting a full commission. And I'd like each of you, starting with John, to talk about where do we see the confirmations in the post that are most important to our industry. How do you see that playing out? And talk a little bit about the larger debate going on as it relates to, does the president have the ability and authority to remove minority commissioners, whether it's from the FCC or the FTC or the privacy commissions? And will the courts, and how long the court process, what does that mean for Senator Thune leading the Senate to move confirmation? Senator Schatz is blocking all confirmations until this larger issue is resolved. This is a big constitutional presidential authority, how our independent agencies work and make decisions, and the norms and practices and precedents of the last 50, 60, 70 years. So with that introduction, John, I'm going to let you tackle the broader issues as well as what do you see on the confirmation process?
Yeah, I think I'll give it a start. I think right now, as you said, Senator Schatz is holding the nominations, right? And I think that the Democrats would like to get some sort of understanding with respect to whether nominations of their own will proceed and will they get them. For example, you mentioned Commissioner Starks is leaving next month, and his replacement has not been nominated. And so, and if there was to be a nomination, what would happen? So I think that remains to be done. And I think also with respect to the most notable firings of Democratic commissioners in our space of the Federal Trade Commission, that case is pending before the courts. We saw a decision regarding a privacy commission where Democratic appointees were restored. But I do think it's going to, go through the court system. It's going to take a while. And I'm interested to hear what others think about, how soon it gets to the Supreme Court and whether the Supreme Court decides in a timely manner. Keep in mind the court typically closes up shop in a little more than a month and comes back in October, right? So it may be that Senator Thune has to cut a deal, and there has to be an understanding at some point if they want to get some of the nominations through. But for now, I think things are probably stalled.
And Tamar, what does that mean for business at the FCC? Bureaus can move items on delegated authority, but also, is there a quorum? If there's, could someone raise an objection? And if so, what happens then? Walk our listeners through what it means to have only 3 commissioners at the FCC.
Sure. So as you mentioned, Chip, the FCC needs 3 commissioners to act, to have a quorum to act. And there are, lots of kind of bipartisan items that the FCC could continue action on, whether it's robocalling or subsea cables, national security items. So that there's lots of things that they can do on a bipartisan basis. Where it's not bipartisan, then Chairman Carr can use his bureaus acting on delegated authority. He can use his bully pulpit. He can use the Enforcement Bureau, investigations. So I think Chairman Carr still has lots of options to kind of pursue his agenda. It will give Commissioner Gomez a little bit more power with just 3 commissioners if she really wants to disrupt the business of the commission.
And I forgot in my introduction to recognize Richard. Richard, please introduce yourself and jump in. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the confirmation process, both large and specific to the NTIA and FCC. Richard?
Happy to, and thanks, Chip. Richard Ward, I'm over at Venable as a senior policy advisor in our government relations practice. Most of my background is around energy, and looking forward to talking about some of those issues as well as in my past, I've covered some telecom and communications and spectrum issues. And so, eager to get these folks in place because there's a lot of work that needs to be done, particularly over at NTIA, and how some of these programs are going to continue that are from the previous administration, and how they're looking to move these forward and change them. And I think at FCC, some of these national security priorities in terms of the broader debate with China and supply chain issues is going to be a particularly big focus, and hopefully Congress can keep moving the Spectrum Auction Authority forward, as I know that's a spot that a lot of people want to see some progress after years of not having that authority renewed.
And Patricia, your thoughts?
My thoughts are I think both of these individuals will be confirmed. It's only a matter of when, and the broader context will have an impact on that, certainly, as Chip, you and John have discussed. And what is the impact of those delays on things like the BEAD program, where we're still waiting on further guidance from NTIA, which is unlikely to come out until there's a new administrator in place over there. So I wholly agree with Tamar in terms of non-controversial items that the FCC can probably still move forward, but there will be some more roadblocks that Chairman Carr will face in terms of his delete proceeding, to the extent things can't be done on delegated authority.
Hey, Chip, I want to chime in a couple extra thoughts, because I actually think that NTIA, we're likely to get, I don't think BEAD's going to wait for Ariel's confirmation. I think the political heat on it will be too much, right? You've got Senator Capito, and the drumbeat to get the shovels in the ground, right? And so I think speculation is that they're going to do something in June. I don't quite see Ariel getting confirmed in June. It would be nice to see all this resolve, but I think that's a tall order. But on timing, another thing to think about, and this goes to Tamar's thoughts about a quorum and whatnot, is that Commissioner Symington has to leave the building at the end of the year. His term expired in June in 2024, and he can serve through the end of the next year, and that's this year. So he has to leave the building before the next session of this Congress, and so that may force hands in order to get people confirmed and a deal in order to get people in place. But I imagine that's a post-summer conversation, but maybe we'll be surprised and we'll have a very productive June and July.
So as you bring up the guidance from NTIA, Secretary Ludnick, Secretary of Commerce, everyone on the panel in the discussion, if you could give me your prediction, is it speed to bead? That will the guidance allow the states who have already have had plans adopted, who have shovel-ready projects, will the new guidance disrupt that and delay it, or will it speed it? Delay or speed? And y'all can answer that question for the audience. John?
I'll say speed. I say it's going to be speed. There's going to be some flexibility and to revisit some things, but I don't think it's going to. I imagine you won't get something that says, "Hey, everybody, we're going to redo everything and we're going to, start from scratch, or we're going to push this out." I don't think they're going to give the headline to the Democrats and say, "Hey, the Republican administration just kicked the can down the road 2 years on this," right? And that's not going to be something I think that they're going to do. So I think you'll see some ability to move forward while changes are made, particularly on ultra high cost locations, and maybe those get a rethink. And as some people speculate, maybe that's an opportunity for Mr. Musk and Starlink.
So, John, in that context, if there's a lot of speculation that there could be a cap on high cost locations, and if that cap is significantly low, the House E&C committee recommended a 10,000 per passing cap. Some have talked as low as 5,000. If you were to adopt a low cap, would that cause states to have to recompete some of their plan, and would that delay, or any thoughts as to what are the things that could, instead of speeding the process, make the states rework much of their plan, and in the process face potential challenges, litigation, and delay?
I think that's one of them, Chip, right? I think that's one of them. I imagine it's going to be done in a manner that states have the ability to sort of proceed on what they can proceed with, and then sort of, carve out the problematic areas. And that would probably be the approach. Because again, I don't think what's likely to come out of NTIA is going to fuel headlines that, okay, you've just complained when you arrived in office in hearings in January, February, March about the no shovels in the ground, and then 2 years later there's still no shovels in the ground. So I think you're going to see sort of some hybrid approach that allows some speed and then some rethinking. And certainly no money for anything other than build networks seems to be the plan.
I'm going to come back to that question, John, about nothing but building and deployment, but I'd love to hear from the rest of the panel. Anybody who wants to add to John's view, speed versus delay?
I think John is right. There's got to be speed. There's increasing cry for this guidance and to get the states moving again. And even if there is a very low cap, hopefully, as John said, they'll let the states kind of work around that and get shovels in the ground for what they've already approved. And, hopefully the streamlining some of the other requirements, right, that the Republicans and Senator Cruz have talked about getting rid of, maybe that will, again, work to increase the speed of getting things going and getting more people bidding where the bidding process is still underway.
Patricia, Richard, speed,
Yeah,
speed to bead, build, baby, build, or is it going to be a delay?
I don't think there's any appetite for delay, and I certainly don't think for states who are already close to toward the end of the process, I don't think there's an appetite for them to have to go back and start from the beginning and rerun their processes. That would be very costly and would have significant delays. So I don't think there's appetite for that, given the criticisms in the last year or so as to the delays already.
Richard?
I think we're talking speed as well. I mean, the program was originally set up to have all these checks and balances in place, right, with the states, and set up for accountability. And so I think the hope is with the new administration, they can sort of take some of that was people were complaining about and strip it off and really push the states to get moving. And hopefully all those other checks and balances have been completed, whether it's the plans, the mapping, the all the stakeholder engagement they had to do, because that's really why we don't have anything, for a long time, is that's just the way the program was set up. But now you have an opportunity to push it forward, and hopefully they take that opportunity. And I do think maybe we'll see some appetite for others besides broadband cable as part of it as well.
Well, I'd like for the record, when we submitted comments to the Department of Energy reforms on federal lands as far as permitting of data centers and energy and fiber networks, we use the term build, baby, build. So I would like to claim that brand for INCOMPAS if we could. And so complementary though to building and deploying is also workforce. Louisiana, their broadband office has a significant amount of their funding going to AI workforce training initiatives. Will that be something that the Commerce Department allows to go forward? Or do y'all think that it will be only deployment and not something complementary like workforce training? Any thoughts on that aspect?
Well, when you combine AI, right, and you need the labor to build,
Yeah.
and so maybe states like Louisiana will be able to make the case. You would hope that there's some flexibility. And certainly this administration is all in on AI, right? And using AI to become a leader. So maybe there is a way to pitch AI training with workforce.
So it's kind of
Get the
interesting that
job.
Louisiana Broadband Office and their AI workforce training initiative, they put it all under an American First framework. So they try to use all the AI and America First pillars and columns as they combine both deployment and training together. All right, so I'm going to go to the next big issue, and not to be redundant, but last night the big beautiful bill passed. It has a lot in it. INCOMPAS we're very proud that we were able to work with the leadership, with the Energy and Commerce Committee, and to do something or build from what we started within our association and membership over the last year and a half, which is an AI Center for Competition. And we have worked with the leadership to have an AI modernization across all of government, the cost savings, the efficiency of our governmental agencies adopting AI technologies in contracting, procurement, and services. But we paired it with a moratorium on new state laws and regulations as it applies to the models and the applications. It doesn't disrupt existing or general applicability of laws or a lot of the good things that are happening at the state level, but at least on the model development and the application, we think it's important to have a national framework. And that language is in the House. We'll see how it's changed in the Senate, but it's something we'll be watching very closely. One of our new companies, and Richard, this is something we're working with Venables on, and that is the AI infrastructure on both sides of the data center, the energy networks, the pipelines, the grids, the energy supply, powering the needs of the data centers, and then the fiber connectivity of that is required to distribute and disseminate from the data center. So those critical elements of the AI infrastructure, one provision in reconciliation would set up for interstate and multi-state energy networks, the ability to have a 1-year time frame for permitting, a consolidated review across the agencies, 1 6-month extension for a total of 18 months, giving time certainty on big projects and big builds under the justification that we're in a race to build the AI infrastructure in relation to China, and they're not really stopping to permit. So how can we accelerate and expedite and streamline our permitting? And there is a model in reconciliation that might be appropriate to extend to other multi-state projects, whether it's large fiber routes, that what we're now calling the AI connectors and the AI corridors. But Richard, do you want to comment on what is in reconciliation as it relates to the permitting of energy projects?
Well, yeah, you have two. I mean, you have, and it will be really interesting to see if they survive the Senate. They're drafted in a way that, with the intention of passing the Byrd rule with respect to fees, but it still leaves much question as they dig into it over there. But certainly permitting with respect to building out pipelines and NEPA reforms are a major win with House Republicans moving forward with those efforts. It was long considered that may not be possible, but folks have sort of figured out a way to at least frame it to give it a fighting chance in the Senate. So we will see what happens. There are a lot of other issues around permitting that even prior reconciliation with something like the Advance Act for nuclear, and I do think we'll see where the dust settles on much of these AI energy related provisions, and as well as some of the haircuts that the clean energy tax credits took that many would argue are going to impact building out energy infrastructure. I do think there's an opportunity on the other side of reconciliation to look at comprehensive legislation and maybe as we move past the partisan portion of reconciliation and the clean tax cuts taking a whack or being reduced. I mean, they're going to produce so much revenue for this bill they couldn't resist. But if they're no longer looked through the prism of the Inflation Reduction Act, but are looked through the prism of meeting the growing AI energy demand and maintaining U.S. leadership on AI and race for China, if you wrap sort of those themes around permitting and tax credits to build out infrastructure, you have a fighting chance to regroup. As I mean, you even had Elon Musk in to talk about this issue. I don't know how the members were still awake, but in to talk to Energy and Commerce this morning about this very issue. So he wasn't waiting. And so I think you're going to see a lot of positioning around these issues, regardless of what comes out of reconciliation.
And for all of our listeners, as the market is being transformed, so is INCOMPAS. So I never thought I would say I have a small modular nuclear reactor company as part of INCOMPAS, or the Williams Company, the largest gas pipeline and gas generation company in the country, or Southwestern Power building grids and transmission lines through Arizona and New Mexico, connecting data center hubs, has joined, and Pacific Fusion Nuclear Technology Company have all come together in a coalition to try to build out the AI infrastructure on both sides of the data center. And so we're very excited to have this infusion and diversity of what will power the AI economy and the AI applications to come. But it just kind of shows if that is happening to INCOMPAS, it's going to be happening across the government and the policy and in the marketplace. Patricia, Tamar, anything that y'all would like to add before we get to Spectrum, the Spectrum auction language and reconciliation?
I guess I would just add, Chip, on permitting, right? It's great that that's in the reconciliation bill, but to do the long haul, you also have to go through local jurisdictions, right? And so I think we do still need, the FCC, the small cell order. We need FCC action as well to help the fiber builders with kind of all jurisdictions, not just federal agencies.
Yes.
Right. And I think with these subsidy programs like BEAD and others, seeking to deploy fiber quickly, hopefully that provides an incentive for some action on the things outside of the reconciliation process through the FCC and perhaps local reforms, et cetera.
Well, it's both in reconciliation and then Energy and Commerce Committee will be moving a broad permitting reform legislation through ENC in June, hopefully in the summer. The Senate, we think sometime by the end of the year, we have an opportunity to do a major bipartisan permitting reform for our fiber companies and our other AI infrastructure, hopefully in a very holistic, comprehensive basis. So on to spectrum. Tamar, you want to take this question first? What do you make of the language? Does it survive the Senate? Does it change the industry? Does it end spectrum sharing as we know it?
Well, I think, what comes out of the Senate and the negotiations have yet to be seen. But we, the FCC needs its authority. We need to get this moving, right? So it's almost like just give the FCC the authority and get these auctions started again. There are so many industry creative ways to use spectrum, right? And so many satellite, cellular, Wi-Fi, wireline, there's so many ways to use spectrum, and just hopefully bring up the spectrum will get us moving forward again and letting industry be creative.
John?
I think the fight over that bill is going to be about national security, right? And whether they have given too much away, as Senator Cantwell says, and I think there will be some Republicans in the Senate who question that as well, whether there's enough spectrum for the Department of Defense to do the things it needs to do to protect national security going forward, including the administration's priority of building the so-called Golden Dome. As a Notre Dame alum, I take offense to using that trademarked name, but in any event, that remains to be resolved. But there seems to be significant momentum behind this that hadn't existed before. So if I was betting, I would bet it gets done in June and that some deal gets cut with Republicans, and that they do this. But I don't know that it quite looks exactly the way it looks today. But you've got the president, speaking about it, right? You've got, a consensus out of the House, and now we've got, I guess, some of the concerns of the national security hawks on the Senate Republicans have to be addressed. Senator Fisher has to be satisfied, and others, right?
So in this big debate, there's one component of the lower 3.1 to 3.5, which is DoD, and the wireless industry has long coveted that mid-band prime spectrum. DoD has built a fortress around it. They've dug deep moats. They have everything they can to defend that spectrum. Who wins that? Does DoD or does the industry win it? And then as a consequence, as a cascading effect, what happens to CBRS? And does that now, what has been viewed as a dynamic spectrum sharing that has been successful, that the cable, the tag, the fixed wireless industries, the WISPs, the co-ops, many are using, has a broad alliance. What happens to CBRS in this fight? Any takers on that prediction or question?
Not clear yet. Not clear. I think it will become clear.
Are you saying that
clearer at least, right?
Are you saying that the fog of war is too cloudy to see?
Yeah, I think we've got to now start hearing, something from the Senate. Now they've got something to work with from the House, right? And that's sort of the marker that's been set. I think we now have to, hear how the Senate's thinking about it and how they have going to address their concerns from the same people who have, I think, been reluctant to move forward, right? Those making sure that the military has what it needs. And in terms of all the competing interest chip, military, big wireless, big cable industries, I think, and then smaller providers relying on that spectrum. I think the military is probably the biggest dog in the fight there.
Mm-hmm. With the sharpest elbows, I'd say.
Yeah.
They are fierce. Any other, before we move to the next issue, any other thoughts, comments? Anything else in the reconciliation package that anybody wants to call attention to before we go to the next category of questions, national security, cybersecurity. And as y'all look in that category, whether it is subsea cable or other major initiatives that will give our government, our national security, and our business enterprise and our individuals who depend on our networks greater security in this age. Any thoughts on in that category of what you see first that was established either in personnel and now in policy going forward in the category of national security and cybersecurity? Richard, I'm gonna start with you, and then Patricia, you get to go second this time. Tamar and John, you wrap it up.
Just from a policy perspective, more broadly, we really have a challenge with Chairman Senator Paul as chairman of the Senate Homeland Security Committee, because he looks at everything through an extreme privacy lens, and he does not trust the government in sort of any of these issues. And so the Homeland Committee, particularly in the Senate, I mean, I think we're going to see a lot of good stuff come out of the House Homeland, but particularly in the Senate, I think it's gonna be a real challenge, and it's a real unknown. I mean, you have CISA 2015 that needs to be renewed and reauthorized, and there's lots of discussions around that, which was the information sharing legislation, not the Cybersecurity Information Security Agency. So the first CISA, you have, particularly as many of your members are critical infrastructure, a lot of concern around counter UAS authorities, and there was a major hearing in Senate Judiciary this week on how do we extend that beyond the federal agencies. And there's just been a real reluctance for Senator Paul to move some of these things. So I think as we get past reconciliation, will people be able to engage with that committee and sort of move some of these priorities along, sort of the bigger sort of cyber environment that impacts critical infrastructure? I know there's more sort of specific things around the telecom space more directly and cable space more directly I'll let folks speak to, but that's sort of, one of my concerns is many of the stakeholders have been really worried about that.
Sure, and from the telecom perspective, national security has really been a priority over, I would say, the last, I think, almost decade at this point, under the initial Trump administration, not halted by the Biden administration under Chairwoman Rosenworcel, and even today the FCC adopting two new items, both national security related, to try to box out some of the Chinese telecommunications certification bodies and test labs, requiring additional foreign ownership disclosures from FCC licensees, a broad range of licensees who may be required to disclose additional ownership information. We've got a couple of open proceedings. Chip, you mentioned the submarine cable proceeding. There's still the International 214 proceeding that the FCC launched a couple of years ago now that still remains open, all of which really are underpinned by the notion that the FCC needs greater insight into the ownership and control of its licensees. So I think we're going to see that continuing moving forward. We're also, this year, we've seen the FCC launch investigations into some of the covered list entities, seeking information from them and even subpoenaing another company that's on the covered list. And I think we're also going to see from the Department of Commerce, the Office of Information Communications and Telecommunications Services continue to use its authority under the ICTS executive order to adopt new rules, to expand its existing rules that cover ICTS services and products moving forward. So I think national security is going to continue to be an underlying current in our sector.
I agree. And I would just add, my hope is that Chairman Carr's deregulatory agenda will kind of dovetail with his national security agenda, right? Because I think there has been some talk about trying to streamline where we can and with friendly countries, or, if you're repeat players. And so hopefully those two will work together, and people who are repeat players and, have investments from friendly countries will get through the process more quickly. and their transactions or their applications will not be, continuously delayed.
John?
Nothing really to add. I mean, you're seeing this is a bipartisan. There's no daylight between the parties on this, right? This is something that they actually agree on and they can work with. And I don't think there's any debate that streamlining some of it can be done. But you're seeing it. It's as Patricia said, it's been happening for a long time, right? You don't get an international 214 with foreign ownership today without having an acceptable security plan. So, there are additional things being layered in, and that's been ongoing. And I think that it will continue to tighten up. And I don't think there's going to be, this is not I don't see this being a big political battle.
And I think we're also seeing from the Team Telecom perspective, trying to harmonize some of the mitigation agreements that the licensees have. Some licensees may have agreements that are, over a decade old, and we're starting to see, the Team Telecom ask for new agreements or using more of a standard form agreement that has much more detailed requirements than some of the older mitigation terms.
Well, I'll move from national security, cybersecurity, to something that has been with us almost 100 years, and that is the USF. And what is its future as it now is pending before the Supreme Court? Oral arguments were earlier this year. Most people predict that the Supreme Court will affirm the constitutionality of USF. And then my question is, if that happens, if that's the case, the affirmation occurs, what's next for USF? And what does that look like? Does the FCC take reform? Does the Congress, which had in the last Congress formed bipartisan working groups to look at potential USF reform? What is the future for USF? What is potential reform? And when would that be likely to occur? Patricia, you take that first.
So I think we agree with you that the Supreme Court is unlikely to overturn the USF program as it has been for, since at least 1996 and before that. That's the unlikely outcome. And even if they did, I think they would give the FCC or Congress some period of time, given the importance of the program and the impact that would have. The agency and Congress would have some time to make reforms and changes that are needed to address any of the concerns as to the non-delegation. That's the unlikely scenario. This is something we're actively following. But in terms of the longer term, if the Supreme Court upholds USF, I know there have been some proposals about expanding the contributions base to include some parties and services who are not currently contributing to the Universal Service Fund. I'm not sure how much legs that effort has. I think that's something that Chairman Carr has previously expressed support about, at least in regards to the edge providers. I think there's some potential legislation on the Hill, but I'm not sure that will have legs moving into the future. I'd welcome thoughts from others.
Tamar?
Yeah, so I think that, the contribution factor is just too high, right? And there needs to be something done. I think the recipients of USF do not want it to become an appropriated program, right? We saw what happened to ACP. We don't want that to happen to USF. It's too important. I hope that you are both right, that the Supreme Court is going to uphold the legality of this. During oral argument, there was some discussion about, can we put a pause on our order if it goes against the FCC to give Congress time to fix this? And my read of that discussion was, that might not be a good idea. The court might not want to do that. So I'm hopeful that they uphold it. I'm hopeful that the bipartisan working group gets back together and comes up with solutions for contributions. I know that's easier said than done. But I do think that, obviously Chairman Carr supports that. I think Chairman Carr would also support, relooking at USF and RDOF. There are so many RDOF defaults, right? They just keep turning in the RDOF. A carrier just filed for a waiver of the penalties. So I think that the FCC is going to have to have to look at the existing USF programs and the distribution going forward. I don't know what they'll do about it, but I think they're going to have to rethink some of this.
Hey, Chip, I'm going to jump in. I actually, sat and watched the oral argument and thought it was fascinating. Clearly, I think Justice Gorsuch would like to vote to affirm the Fifth Circuit. The three liberal justices definitely want a vote to overturn the Fifth Circuit and find the USF funding constitutional. That leaves 5 justices somewhere in the middle. I think Thomas and Alito would be expected to go with Gorsuch, but even Alito seemed to be throwing up his hands as the case is messy. And nearly all of them expressed significant concerns about the impact the program would have, or overturning the USF would have on people, healthcare institutions, schools, libraries. So they all seem to be very sensitive to that concern. But I'm kind of expecting a mixed decision. And I'm still betting that USF is not found unconstitutional, but it wouldn't surprise me to get a plurality decision where they agree in the outcome, but for different reasons. And I think that perhaps inside that may be a silver lining because hopefully it leaves enough questions out there for people to stew about and worry about as it gets remanded to Fifth Circuit for unknown outcomes for actually the working group to get going and to do something. And I know that Senator Fisher is going to take over the leadership of that working group. It'll be co-chaired by Senator Fisher and Senator Lujan. And I think they are awaiting a Supreme Court decision. And I think that the concept of working group, I think, is one that will move forward and hopefully continue to find bipartisan consensus and build upon what they've done before. But I think everyone's waiting on the Supreme Court decision, which is, by the way, expected within the next 5 or 6 weeks. Watch your calendars. Supreme Court decisions come out Thursdays. There were interesting one today. They'll add dates later in the month. But I do think the working group has to do 2 things. They have to figure out contribution reform. And I think Patricia was referring to the bill introduced on a bipartisan basis by Senators Mullins and Kelly and Crapo and Kramer on contributions reform in particular, saying broadband and tech you should contribute, but distribution reform as well. And you got to remember the chair of the Commerce Committee is Senator Cruz. And while I don't see widespread support for his idea that some USF programs should be appropriated, there is probably widespread support for his idea that we need to look at in and out. We need to look at distribution reform, right? He likes to say you can't have 120 programs in the federal government support broadband deployment. That's not unreasonable, right? We need to rationalize, especially if BEAD goes forward, right? And we spend $42 billion to build. We need to figure out what are programs like the high cost fund supposed to do. I'm surely there's a role for it, right? And in the wake of ACP, what is Lifeline doing, and how might that be fixed to help consumers in a more meaningful way? And so there's work to be done on both sides of the equation. I think the Supreme Court decision is sort of putting things on hold, but not really, because the same people who do Spectrum do this, right? And so there's always seems to be something that has to be cleared before this happens, right? So I'm hopeful we get a Supreme Court decision, maybe the big beautiful bill happens, we have a Spectrum deal, and then people can return from August recess and maybe focus on this some. Does it happen this year? I would love it. I wouldn't bet on it, though. I think it's going to be a little bit of a process.
One of the things as I make the rounds on the Hill, talking both to members and staff, both sides, is that with BEAD, and because of the uncertainty that the Supreme Court or the Fifth Circuit, now the Supreme Court review of that, has injected into just the whole debate and the discussion and the thinking around USF, is that there seems to be an emerging consensus is post-pandemic funding, including BEAD, we should be able to take a review and look at what has been the impact of all of these different broadband initiatives. How has that changed the broadband deployments and the service, and have we connected everyone? What is the right size going into the future? And then look at contribution and distribution reform. So maybe an assessment, a right sizing a new agreement of what should be in the future USF, and then how do you fund that? And so I think that will be a process, and it may take longer than we think. It may be not this Congress, but the next, or it may be sometime next year before we get to that type of consensus and knowing where BEAD is going and the impact it has on the deployments and the service around the country, especially in the high cost and rural underserved markets. All right, I'm gonna have one last question, and it may be one of the more interesting ones. We are now watching a kind of a convergence of consumer broadband, possibly into one market, as T-Mobile buys MetroNet and Lumos, and as AT&T announced today that they're buying the residential broadband of Lumen, and we see Verizon and Frontier. Are we moving to a convergence and a consolidation where home fiber and national wireless become one national market? And if so, what is the impact? Well, one, do you agree with that? Second, if that is the trend, what does the world look like in 3 to 5 years? How does cable play, and what do they have to do to have a reliable, redundant, abundant spectrum and wireless capability? So I'll let y'all say your particular assessment of what is the future of the consumer broadband market. Will there be a convergence? If there's a consolidation, what does that look like 3 to 5 years from now? And does the Trump administration on mergers and acquisitions approve all of that to make it happen, or to enable that to happen? John, I'll let you start with this one.
Oh my. All right. Well, convergence is a sort of an ill-defined term, right? It's a good time for consolidation, provided you're willing to give up DEI plans, right? We've seen that this week already, and that's consistent with the administration's approach and priorities. Yet the administration has also expressed concerns over antitrust, right? So there might be some point at which it says people have gone too far. But I do think it's we're going to see some merger activity continue apace, right? And we've seen a lot of it so far this year. More to come. And
Cox and Charter, for example.
Cox and Charter. You've got the dismantling of U.S. Cellular, right? And there's probably more to come, right? And you've got the various deals out there, including Lumen, seem to be getting picked apart, right? And I think there's more of it to come. And how it settles, I think you're going to have fewer players, but they're going to do things that are a little different, right? And they're going to have different emphasis, different strengths, right? And no one's going to be exactly right. And then it'll be interesting to watch, in my mind, it'd be interesting to watch. Right now, big cable is largely dependent on big wireless for their wireless offers, right? Does that change? And that to me is a giant question mark, right? That's the most exciting thing to wonder about, right? And figure out, how does that shake out, right? And so I don't know that was much of an answer to your question, other than we're going to see more of it, yes. At what point will it go too far? It's not clear at all. Still early, for us to figure out exactly the way the administration thinks about antitrust, and at what point things could go too far. But I do think when you're looking at markets, it's easy to say that the communications market is not this silo, and this silo. It's becoming blended, right? And then that's convergence.
Tamar?
Yeah, I agree with John, right? That we're definitely headed towards convergence. I think it's good for consumers. I think there will be more consolidation. I mentioned, the RDOF players turning in their subsidies. I think there's going to be a lot of small fiber roll-ups as well. So I know that's not convergence, but it's more mergers, it's more consolidation. At some point, the FCC and the antitrust authorities are going to have to look at whether it's one market for residential broadband, whether it's wired or wireless or combined.
Yeah.
Patricia?
Yeah, I would say I think we're trending in the direction that the wireless and the wired will be at some point considered to be a single market. although perhaps it will still be on a geographic basis, so not a nationwide market in different transactions. But I do think we're heading in that direction. I think the deals with AT&T and Lumen, T-Mobile, Lumos, I think those deals really make that clear that that's where the market is heading. And I think the regulatory analysis will follow that trend.
Richard?
Nothing else to add. Not my area. Sorry.
All right, so we're getting close to the end of the hour. I don't know if we've had any questions that have been asked. I'll get a message on my phone if we, let me see. All right, no questions have been asked. Any last thought, big issue, big idea that any of y'all want to leave for our audience as we finish the first 6 months?
One thing I'm looking at, Chip, is enforcement.
Yeah.
Right. We had the recent case out of the Fifth Circuit, again, very popular court, and that's a decision overturning FCC fines that were imposed on AT&T for mobile privacy related alleged mobile privacy related missteps. And T-Mobile has a case in the DC Circuit. Verizon has a case up in the Northeast. And so figuring out what those decisions mean, and then what it means for FCC Enforcement Authority. There was also a petition filed by CTA and others on FCC enforcement. So I think taking a closer look at the FCC's ability to impose fines in the wake of Jarcasi and now the Fifth Circuit decision, and we're going to have probably 2 more decisions before the year ends on the same topic, will be very interesting to watch for those of us who do a lot of work in front of the Enforcement Bureau. That's one thing we haven't touched on today, which I think is, on my radar of the, more interesting things that are unfolding before us in our communications landscape.
Tamar?
One thing we're watching, right, is Loper Bright and how that impacts what Chairman Carr is able to do with delete and his reform and his streamlining. Because I think that, the end of Chevron deference and Loper Bright and the subsequent cases might restrict the FCC's ability, right, to make broad interpretations, and the courts might, not let Chairman Carr do everything he wants to.
And I know from INCOMPAS's perspective, we're beginning to make decisions that we think a lot will shift to Congress, to the administration, and to the states. And how do we, after really 2.5 decades of really FCC primacy, now this new equilibrium or balance, what does that mean, and how do we advocate effectively? So I welcome your big thought on that front. Patricia?
I was going to mention the states and how the states interplay here with the new kind of approach at the federal level with net neutrality, some of the other items. We see California being very aggressive on regulating VoIP, New York requiring low income, broadband plans. So I think states are really a big factor, and we could see a lot more activity in the states that we would normally see at the federal level, given some of the changing dynamics that the folks have mentioned so far.
Richard?
Yeah, what I'm watching next is, we've had all these requests for information around AI policy from OSTP, Department of Energy, Rep. Julia Fedorchak in the House, and a number of other efforts. And then you also have a number of folks like Paul DeBar getting over to Commerce, hopefully, and who was at Department of Energy for the first term. So there's going to be some good overlap there, and a number of folks getting in place at the Department of Energy and the National Energy Dominance Council. So I think we're going to start to see a real policy evolution here with respect to AI plans, and we should see the White House AI Action Plan, I think, next month from the OSTP filings. And so, how will this all sort of set the path going forward? And much of what's taken place so far is all stakeholders kind of advocating for their priorities. and making sure folks know sort of where their red lines or where their issues may be that are priorities of others. And at some point there has to be, we have to start to build consensus around these issues and find areas where we can work together. And we keep talking about fiber with data centers, and that's critically important. And so how does that piece slide into this as well? They all require power. What does the financing look like? So it's really going to take a whole of government, whole of industry effort to get some of these issues right. Amongst all the other things that are going on is going to be a challenge going forward. But there certainly seems to be a lot of excitement around it.
Well, let me just close by thanking everyone, and not only for the webinar today and your insights in the present, but the relationship that y'all have had with INCOMPAS over the decades and over the years, and the work that we've done together. So I want to just tell everyone on the panel, thank you. Thank you for being with us on the webinar, at our policy summits, representing many of our clients, giving the insights, the wisdom, and the information. This is a period of fast and furious change. We have a transformational technology in AI. We're in a global national security economic race with a great rival, China, as we build and deploy the AI infrastructure. In my lifetime, I don't know if we'll ever have this chance to reform the permitting of how we build things in the country as much as we'll have in the next year. The convergence that's going on in the marketplace between wireless and wired, and the consolidation and the build that's going on right now really is laying the foundational infrastructure for this next age. And that's of great significance to the members and how we advocate for them. And then this huge shift from independent agencies to Congress and to the states. And so the venues where we can have the influence and make a difference is also shifting in a major and dramatic way. So your insight in the midst of this rapidly changing environment is both exciting, challenging, full of risk, but I have a great hope for the future. And so thank you all for being with us and the work that we all do together. And I look forward to seeing y'all soon.